So welcome everyone. My name is Chris. I'm your host with Compliance Group. We have a star-studded cast today to really deep dive into CSA and the benefits and avoiding some of the pitfalls around CSA today. Again, this is episode 3 with our friends at Fresenius. So who is the star-studded cast that we have during today's webinar? So I'm going to go left to right on your screen there. First off, we have Bill Dinocenzo from Fresenius Medical Care. He's a Senior Vice President of the Digital Integration Works within the Global Manufacturing Quality and Supply Group at FMC. He is a lifelong process improvement professional with more than 35 years of experience. He's also part of the FICSA team. He's been an integral component to helping us evolve with CSA and having it tightly integrated with the FDA, excuse me. Below that, we have Mr. Marc Kutter. Marc is the IT quality assurance function at FMC, which defines all corporate software quality procedures, performing software quality assurance, which is testing, validation, and infrastructure qualification. He is also the quality systems auditor for ISO 13485, FDA CFR 820, and other regulations as well. Mr. Francisco Vicenty, he is from the FDA, the Program Manager Case for Quality, the CDRH. He has strategic priorities for 2016 to 17 and will improve access and patient outcomes by engaging industry payers, providers, and patients to increase focus on the quality and performance of medical devices. He's in the device branch in the Division of Manufacturing Quality within the Office of Compliance at the FDA. Below him is Mr. Jason Spiegler. Jason is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives within the Life Science Division within Siemens, and we appreciate him hopping on for a few minutes here. He's got over 22 years of experience in the quality business development and sales management role sector. Prior to Siemens, he worked for Johnson & Johnson, as well as several medical device startup companies. And last but not least, Mr. Khalid Musali, Executive Vice President at Compliance Group. He is also part of the FICSA team, and he has over 25 years of experience in IT manufacturing and quality. He also transitioned to consulting to bring more of that paradigm shift in quality and compliance by leveraging his experience with regulatory agencies. Khalid, without further ado, I will now pass the baton to you.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you to all my guests for joining me, specifically Bill and specifically Marc from Fresenius Medical Care. Marc, I know it's in Germany, it's late in the afternoon now, and you're probably ready for a glass of wine, but thank you for joining us. And of course to Jason and Cisco, for their busy time every time. So I appreciate you guys joining us. And what's really important about this episode, that what you have here is really the initiator of the FICSA team. And the FICSA team, again, is the FDA-Industry CSA team, which Jason will give us the total background about it. This is the team that really started it all. So I'll keep it at that, and I'll let Jason speak to it. But I just want to walk you through a little bit on the agenda. So basically, you're going to meet the FICSA team members. We're going to talk about the FICSA team journey and how really Bill was a major player, and Cisco's help and Jason's help. So it's really a nice packed up agenda from that perspective. And then we're going to jump into Fresenius CSA journey and implementation as they are in the process of implementing it. But I will keep that also as a surprise from Marc to speak to it. And eventually we'll talk about, next steps. What should your next step as industry practitioner after listening to us speaking about CSA and why CSA? I want you to now really think about the objectives. Our objective is whatever you hear us talking about the guidance. Well, do not wait for the guidance. That's number one, because everything we're doing in CSA is within the current regulations. Okay, ISPE GAM spoke to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Start thinking how you want to implement it. Now, what if the FDA Draft Guidance is released? Because we don't know, and we're not going to give you that answer. No one can give you this answer, right? Start thinking about how you can implement it, because that's the right thing to do. Pilot studies are effective. Digitize your current paper CSA process. That is really important. That's, to me, at least in my opinion, my main objective out of CSA is to encourage me to actually automate and not get stuck in the CSV nightmare. Again, our objectives: create awareness to accelerate innovation, and then inspire action so you begin to realize the value. For those of you who did not attend the kickoff with Cisco back in April 23rd, as we kicked off this entire webinar series, and we spoke in details about CSA, and we also gave some example. My colleague Stephen Cook was with us on there. So please go to the recording, listen to the Game Changer webinar with Cisco and Stephen. The webinar material is also provided in a link, and also there's a white paper that compliance group has put together on CSA. So now I'm just gonna go straight to the source. The source is Jason, Cisco, and Bill. And but I'm gonna start with Jason, and I'm gonna ask Jason, how did the CSA initiative begin? How did you get all these smart folks in one room? And it's been going on for so long. So please give us your background.
Yeah, Khaled, thanks for having me on. And I'll just start out by saying that I'm looking forward to this, because I've told the story many times in public, sometimes with Cisco, sometimes without. But what's special about this is having Bill and Cisco together with me, because it's like three old friends reminiscing over some drinks on, how this all started. And it goes back 5 years ago. Again, as part of the role I have at Siemens, I'm constantly trying to bring customers together, the industry together, regulators together, whatever we can do to try to address barriers that are holding back the industry. And in this case, I asked Bill if he would be willing to host this half-day executive roundtable, and he was gracious enough to say, happy to do it, Jason. And then I pressed my luck and I said, hey, what do you think about inviting the FDA to participate? And this is 5 years ago. This is before companies were voluntarily saying, hey, FDA, why don't you come in and have some dialogue with us, right? And again, as part of Case for Quality, Bill knew Cisco and said, yeah, that'd be great. I'll find a way. We'll make this happen. So I always like to announce Bill, because that did take a lot of courage at that point in time 5 years ago. So fast forward, we have this session. We have about 12 to 15 medical device executives from IT, operations, engineering, QA, R&D, the major functions in this room from different companies, and Cisco is there. Bill gives a presentation, and you can see the topic he touched on. And then the format is then I would ask a question to the audience, something that would be provoking. You'd have 4 or 5 executives at each table, and we'd give them about 20 to 30 minutes to talk amongst their table. And then one person would stand up and summarize for the rest of the room. And usually this activity takes 45 minutes to an hour. Well, you can see there the question I asked. I said, what are the biggest barriers stopping you from realizing value from these technology investments you're making? And, I figured there would be a lot of answers, and, the audience would be all over the place. But it was crazy. This went on for over 2 hours, and this group of executives were united and incredibly passionate around their dislike for CSV. And this really became a dirty 3-letter word in the room. And if you go to the next slide, Khaled, when you talk about the challenges and the problems with the CSV, this is just a sampling, right? There's a lot more. I'm not going to read all these, but I remember in this session, things like, yeah, we're risk-based. Everything's high risk, right? And yeah, we validate our QMS and our PLM and our MES just like we would the software in our medical devices. And, we're all like banging our heads on the table, right? This is not the way to do it. And, and then the one I loved was around the deviations, right? When you think about it, because you're really working out all the kinks in development, by the time you get to the formal validation, the majority of the issues you're running into, these deviations are documentation errors, right? They're really non-value added. They're not around the software bugs. So, we're tripping over ourselves. And you know, when you think about the impact, and again, I'm not going to read everything on the screen, you'll get a copy of this, but the net of this is, and I think this was the aha, and I'll certainly let Bill and Cisco comment here in a minute, but the aha here was, oh my gosh, this is foundational. This is holding back innovation. This is holding back continuous improvement. And this isn't, you know, especially when we get into cybersecurity and all the apps out there, and this isn't just medical device and diagnostics, but this is impacting pharma and biopharma and cosmetics and food and so on, right? So, you know, Bill, again, thank you so much for helping to get this started. Maybe if you want to comment on that session, and then Cisco, we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure, Jason. I think for me it was interesting because you know, back 5 years ago, I was fresh into working at Fresenius for a mere 10 years. And believe it or not, that was the first time I had worked for a medical device company ever. And prior to getting to Fresenius, I was more in the high tech world, networking equipment, computer equipment. So, excuse me. So my experience around software was, yes, we did validations and verifications, but they were more, you know, streamlined. They were to the point. And when I got to the environment at Fresenius and realized, you know, in a highly regulated environment that we were in, that there was this awful burden in many things. But, you know, recall, even today, I'm not part of the quality organization. My work at Fresenius was always around how can we improve the way we do business. And that's why it was really about, you know, a global operating model. And in getting folks in the room that particular day when we were talking about bringing in innovative software to improve the manufacturing environment, to improve the safety and efficacy of the products that we're producing, and running into this barrier called CSV to get good improvements out there was really beyond my comprehension. And then when I heard that this was not just a Fresenius medical care issue, that it was an industry-wide issue, that to me was an eye-opener. And that was my aha moment that, you know, we can do something about this. And I remember catching Cisco's eye during this conversation, and he was kind of shaking his head, you know, and I'll let Cisco fill you in on this, but I remember, Cisco, you said something to the effect like, that is not the intention of what the regulation is about. We're not here to be the roadblock. And I think that was sort of the turning point for this group and hopefully for the industry in general.
Yeah, I think, Bill, there's a lot that just went on that day that it just was very eye-opening. I know, and Jason, you know, even the start of this and where we led to this point started even further back, right? We started with, you know, really rethinking how do we approach, you know, even doing the way from an FDA standpoint, we look at inspections, how do we get more of that objective data? And I think, like Bill, coming from a more semiconductor technology background where all these types of systems are just part and foundational to supporting the work that you do, I had assumed that that was the case, and, you know, we could just do this data and the concept of this virtual inspection would come flying through. And then we started hitting these roadblocks. And Bill was gracious enough to, and as you mentioned, courageous enough to invite us there and engage with us to really learn what was going on. And when you asked that question, I was expecting the traditional, well, cost of the system or the, you know, justifying that system versus other systems within IT, just making the business cases. That's what I was prepared to hear. Was not prepared to hear something along the lines of the CSV work being such a barrier. And then hearing the stories of what happened or what occurred, what was being done, were just a fascinating opportunity that came up, because it really was not the intent. And if you look at even the original guidance that were written, there was an intent of flexibility there. And I think there was an assumption that the agency made that it was clear enough, and it was something we never revisited in years. to go back and see what the impact was on that. So you're correct, I think, to the point, and I remember this saying, because that wasn't the intent. That's not the intent that we had then. Now we want these technologies in place. We always wanted to enable more of this to be part of what helps drive value and quality within the development and production of these products. It's not an idea that we should have been a barrier. And I can get it. We never commented or we never changed the dynamic on that. It wasn't until that moment that we got actual real feedback on what was going on in that particular space.
Yeah, so Khaled, just to continue the story, right? So we had this fantastic provoking event where, you know, again, this is the intent of the case for quality. How do we get that stakeholder engagement and really start to surface this stuff in a very candid and transparent way to the FDA, so they can understand what's happening and how do we change that? And coming out of that session, again, just to really recognize and give tremendous kudos to Cisco, he raised his hand and said, I want to be part of solving this problem. So then I think I pressed my luck a little bit. I got back on with Bill and Cisco and said to Bill, what do you think about having a 2 or 3 day workshop where Cisco and whoever, you know, I think it was Tamara who wound up coming from the FDA with Cisco, but why don't we come on site and we can look at one of these filing cabinet size validations that are such a burden, right? And you know, an MES, for example, let's take a look at that. And again, you talk about being courageous. I mean, you know, Bill, you openly invited the FDA to come in and spend a couple of days looking at this stuff, so which was phenomenal. And I think if you wouldn't mind telling the story, your experience with that, Bill, and even maybe that story around the gauge and how and it's so counterintuitive, right? You would never have expected we invite the FDA and good things will happen, but in this case, I think some really great things happened. So I'll hand off to you if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, I wonder if it was courageousness or courage, or if it was just plain stupidity. I think, you know, I never looked at any sort of regulating body to be sort of, you know, I'll use the term the enemy. I think that, you know, the FDA, like any, you know, regulating body, you know, from a government agency or wherever, their intent there is to help organizations, help industry do the right thing, right? And I don't know about anyone else in the medical device or pharmaceutical industry, but I know at Fresenius Medical Care, we're not in this to harm people or to do wrong. And so intuitively, to me, it was like we're just trying to do things better. And so I got to tell you, you know, again, I'll reemphasize the fact that I am not today or have I ever been part of the Fresenius Medical Care Quality Organization, but as we like to say, we're all part of the quality effort, right, to deliver safe and effective products. And I did bump heads quite a bit with our quality leads. You know, I could remember one of them saying to me, you know, I don't talk to the FDA unless it starts with a 482 handed to me. And to me, it was like that was completely it was unfathomable that there would be a barrier like that. And I will say that in the subsequent time working with the FDA and working with the quality organization within my company, that barrier is dissolving rapidly. And or my perception of it is, I should say. And I think what Jason was referring to, when we got together with Cisco and Tamara in the room, and there were a number of people from excuse me, my company as well as Jason's company, Siemens, we were talking about you know, we had installed an MES, CAMSTAR, and it was finding an out of spec parameter in one of our processes on a very large carousel that's part of our process. It's like a 25-foot diameter carousel and indexes. And every time it indexed, the pressure, because it has to go from cell to cell, there'd be a spike in the pressure. And that spike exceeded limits. And under normal circumstances, without our electronic data acquisition systems and so forth, we used to check that parameter periodically and look at a gauge, and and we never looked at the gauge during the indexing time when that gauge would jump up, and we would look at it during more of a stable state. And so it seemed like it was fine forever, and in fact it was. It's just that the way we are now capturing the information, more precise information about the process, our systems were alerting us that we had an out of spec condition. And so one of the first things that manufacturing and quality people started saying is, well, let's go back to the way we were doing it before. Let's take out all the goodness we have of electronic systems and these controls we have, and go back to where we know we had stability. And it was in that room with the FDA in the room, this situation came up in discussion, that we had a discussion about, well, wait a minute, is it a problem in the process that we've been doing for 25 or 30 years the same way? Or is it just that now we're measuring things a little differently and we have to understand what that is? And maybe we can just, put some safeguards in place around that one single parameter as we further investigate, understand, and revalidate the overall process. And that's where we ended up. But it was a discussion about, a manufacturing process that was giving us some problems, or at least we perceived there were some problems because of the way that we were now measuring it differently. But we had an open and honest discussion about the issue, the remedy, and ultimately, what could we do in the short term before we get to an ultimate long-term solution. And those are the types of discussions that I think need to take place. And we ultimately did not lose ground. We actually made up ground as we went through that process.
This is an awesome example. Yes, love it.
I was going to say, I cannot stress enough. Yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of that example there, because there was just, and it was great to have Tamara, who was an investigator who's actually in the district, out in the room with us at that point in time, to engage with and also feedback during something like that. But the idea there, and I think that's a perfect example of some of the things that we kept encountering and saw being kind of confounded within the context of the validation activities, that we're trying to separate now, right? If you looked at that example, that whole process was validated in one particular way. That's, the gauge, when it was at steady state, that's when you measured it. That's what your process was, as you mentioned, for 25 years. And it was delivering good results from a quality standpoint. The system, the validation of the system, was doing what it intended to do. It captured the data, and it captured data of that whole process appropriately. So the computer system works. There, it's validated. The process works. That was validated. Somehow the two activities got confounded, and that happens a lot. And that's how we want to try to separate with regards to some of the work we're doing with the draft guidance, because one fix that was phenomenal was just, we're going to continue to just capture the data physically the way we had it for this process, while we characterize the rest of the data that we're getting from the system. All valid. Nothing changed in the way that process was originally validated. And Tamara, who was there, was able to confirm, yeah, that would be an acceptable solution. And everybody can actually move on and start working and leveraging the data and information coming from the system. But it's that piece of, when we talk about the assurance work that we're doing, it's what is the system doing itself, and what's the system doing to that process? And oftentimes that process, the product, and the risk it entails gets rolled into what the system is supposed to deliver, and really does slow things down and confound things. And we've never been very clear about that. I think another aspect of that experience that we saw and learned, and I comment is, we often see companies go back and add stuff to their processes, their overall validation activities, their efforts in order to add more documented control, but not really get a better process, right? Oftentimes it's a process that has more potential for errors. So, you know, what we wanted to do and what we got the opportunity to see there and engage on was, you know, here's a company, and what we saw was a process that's trying to do and effectively doing the right things. Compliance was taking the lead, right, in terms of not the organizational piece of compliance, but the goal was achieving and demonstrating compliance versus, is this process and everything doing the right thing that we needed to do? And that was an opportunity for us to at least reset in that example, but also take the feedback back that we probably need to reset this across the board in the industry.
That's great. Gentlemen, thank you. Cisco, by the way, I haven't welcomed you yet. Thank you so much for joining. I know you had some technical difficulties. It's always
sorry about that.
Thank you. Hopefully you're all safe, staying safe at the very least this time. The other question, actually, Jason, this was definitely a great example, and really, again, it takes us back to the critical thinking, right? This is what we were really pushing for. The critical thinking, not just follow something that 20 years ago somebody did it. What can we do? You know, think outside the box, focus on the patient and the product, risk. Jason, I just want to kind of let our audience know a little bit about how you formed the team. How did you start calling every single individual? How did we all end up one day under the roof of the FDA? I was a little scared, by the way, when I got there. I'm like, oh God, now they're going to ask me, how did you validate that MES system here? So I was a little scared about it. So just tell me a little bit about the team, and I wanted to present you these hardworking folks.
Sure. And I think it kind of builds on the story we just heard in both Bill and Cisco's comments. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of projects, right? A lot of the technologies out there, like an MES from Siemens, like high value, right? It's going to give you the error proofing, the data collection, and so on, right? So much value there. But there's a lot of misperceptions out, and I think a lot of times organizations get caught up and there's this very conservative, old school way of thinking that's lacking critical thinking, to your point. And so coming out of the 2-day workshop, I circled back with Cisco, or 3-day, whatever it was, I circled back with Cisco and Bill, and we talked about forming a team, right? And I asked Bill if he could be the executive champion from an industry perspective to really help support the team and jump on the phone with other executives if needed, and so on. So coming out of that, I reached out to a number of executives I knew, and I basically said, look, I'm looking for folks that are your most innovative and creative thinkers who also know CSV, right? I'm very passionate about leadership development and creating high-performing teams, and more importantly, having the environment and the culture for those teams to really perform. And that's really critical. And getting the folks that challenge the system and think differently and aren't going to get caught up in those misperceptions and have that old way of thinking was critical. I think almost more important than, we're the experts in CSV. And when you look at this team, it is a phenomenal team made up of those kinds of people. It is both large companies, small companies. It covers different segments of medical devices and diagnostics. We've got some global reach on the team. Obviously going to hear from Marc, and Marc's been a fantastic contributor, and so on. We've expanded now. We're into a little bit of biopharma and pharma, right? J&J, Baxter, Gilead. You guys heard Gilead and J&J the last couple of webinars. So it's really a fantastic team. And Bill and Cisco, anything you guys want to add about the team itself?
I mean, I'll just say that, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Sorry about that. I just jumped in. I think it's been phenomenal, and I think one of the advantages that this has that it kind of brought together is the opportunity to really kind of, from an FDA standpoint, get direct feedback and test things out quickly and find out if the issues that need to be addressed that we were seeing, from the initial gathering, are actually being addressed effectively, right? It's not a matter of us kind of in the background, in the dark, throwing things together and then throwing it out there publicly and seeing what sticks. This has made it very effective with rapid feedback to really engage and get some great thinking involved with the solutions.
And I was just going to say that, you know, when we got Marc, and there was a couple of other of the Fresenius folks early on that were involved, but, you know, getting the people who really are living with executing and reviewing validations day in, day out, they're the ones who are feeling the pain. They're the ones who are getting the pressure about, you know, make sure you do things in a compliant way, make sure we get this done rapidly, you know, hitting both ends of that. And so, you know, I just think, you know, from what I've gleaned by reading many of the minutes and the output from this team, a lot of hard work, a lot of discussion, a lot of productive discussion took place. And maybe I'll just ask Marc to, you know, who's been there since day one, you know, what he's really experienced through it all.
Yeah, that's for me. It was also, first of all, it was really great to be one of a few European guys to be able to be part of that team and to even come over to the FDA and discuss directly with the FDA and with the team for these topics. And as I'm in Fresenius, I have more or less both seats in there. I'm creating the procedures, defining the procedures. On the other side, I'm supporting the projects or leading some CSV projects, and therefore, and I have, when creating the procedures and sending them out, I got several, even negative, let's say, feedback. Yeah, it's too burdensome, too much efforts, and so on. And when I went to that team, I recognized, hey, there is really big potential to improve without being incompliant. And I think specifically the discussions with other companies, seeing, hey, they have the same issue, but they have the same ideas or want to go in the same direction, gave me the support to introduce this to Fresenius as well.
Yeah, that's actually awesome testimony. From my perspective, when I joined the team close to 3.5, 4 years, I've always been on the progressive end of the spectrum. Sometimes it's a little bit too much, but joining this team literally validated to me what it is. Why are we doing CSV? It's an assurance, right? You're not validating equipment. You're not validating software in a medical device or as a medical device. Why are you doing all this work? I remember John asking me certain question about, so when you validated, did you validate your entire team center? I'm like, okay, well, should I get my lawyer not to answer this? Because I'm talking to an FDA, John Murray. I mean, he's the guy who wrote the GPSB. It's like, well, what am I gonna say? I said, well, yes, we validated team center. He's like, did you validate it for the intended use? I said, well, we literally validated every click, every menu drop. I thought maybe by giving him that answer, he's going to be happy with me. He's like, you people waste your time. You people waste your time. You need to validate for the intended use. I'm like, okay. All right.
That sounds like John.
We miss him, actually, but he's happy.
Yeah.
He's retired. Sounds great. Well, thank you again. You know, this is all really good for the rest of the team. So I want to jump a little bit to the Fresenius medical care side, and I want to get a little bit more, as internally what's really happening. So Bill and Marc, if you can just really comment a little bit about the journey, the organizational pushback, the cultural pushback. How did you really go through it? Because I know now you're in the middle of an implementation of CSA, which is awesome. But how did you get from that point? How did you go through all those? So Bill, and then we'll pass it on to Marc, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. It's been a struggle because, like most medical device companies that are under the watchful eye of the FDA, there's always a concern that if we if we push too hard in a direction to try to make things more streamlined, that we expose ourselves to compliance risks. And while there's no question that we all in this industry need to be compliant to the regulations, you don't get extra credit for being overly compliant. And yet I think we are, in general, an overly compliant type of group. And I think that's there. How did we get there? I don't know for sure, but I can almost guarantee that there's some of the blame falls on industry and some of the blame falls on the agency. And I think it has to do with, just making sure that we keep compliance and efficiency, right? Being able to do our job in an efficient, effective manner to continue to deliver value and safety to the patients. There's a balance there, right? And I came across to our quality organization as almost like the devil, because I kept pushing us in the direction of let's become more efficient, right? And some of our quality people heard that as he's going to push us into being non-compliant. And even though I would say, no, let's be more efficient while remaining compliant, they only heard, let's just become efficient, and they didn't hear anything about compliance. And likewise, when I talk to quality people, I was hearing compliance, 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 and nothing else. So again, it's a matter of finding that good middle ground where we are doing the right thing, we are following the regulations, and this was something that we, Marc, myself, and some others in the company, we had to sort of sell the concept to the organization that the guidance, the draft guidance that is out there today doesn't in any way or shape change what the regulation is. It doesn't, it takes the regulations and it just interprets it in, I think, a more robust, more modern way of looking at things, given what we know as an industry that leverages software tools. And so to get the organization to think differently about how you can achieve compliance efficiently is sometimes not an easy discussion. Marc, I don't know, you were sort of, it's funny because when Marc first started this whole journey, he was part of the quality organization that owned the CSV process. Well, in the evolution of our company, I've sort of shifted gears a little bit, still owning, operational excellence and trying to drive efficiency throughout the organization, but I also now own the digital integration portion of it, and the CSV process has become mine and not quality's. We still do it in compliance with the quality regulations. So now Marc all of a sudden is part of my organization. So he's one of those outside of the quality organizations trying to change something that could affect quality compliance. So Marc, I don't know if you want to take it from there and fill us in a little more.
There we go, yeah. CSA Revolution.
CSA Revolution as a Fresenius. Yeah, that's when I started with Fresenius, I've established the CSA the CSV approach, let's say, under the quality organization, first for EMEA and later for AP and LA as well. And there exactly I had this hey, it need to be compliant. That was the goal. We have to do this to be compliant, and therefore we established a standard, a common, according to best practice approach there. And in parallel, I joined that team, the CSA team, and then I recognized, hey, there are really benefits in changing things, going towards CSA instead of this strict CSV thing that is more looking at or mostly looking on compliance. But I was under quality, and it was different to be able to to change things in that direction. As Bill mentioned, it's exactly like that. And so the concerns were, hey, don't move. Let's stay compliant. It's according to best practice. We can keep it as is. And then with the move to the digital integration organization, to the IT organization, it's not only, I mean, we are now also harmonizing the CSV approach or the validation approach together with North America that have a different approach at the moment, but we are harmonizing it. But we are also using this opportunity to introduce CSA. To change and to change not only the procedures but the whole cultural thinking of validation for software. And when I started this and I discussed with the quality guys, with other validation colleagues within Fresenius Medical Care, there were several concerns that are popped up. Some of them we have already talked about. But I have here listed a few major ones that I want to go through. So because I'm pretty sure whoever want to introduce CSA in his company might get exactly this kind of concerns from the quality guys or other IT guys. So and there are three or four major concerns topics that I received, which is on the one hand side is, hey, you have done this CSA team, you're going to have this guidance probably out, but this was all done only with the FDA. So this is more or less only recognized by the FDA, but we are also regulated by other regulatory bodies in the EU and in the other regions and countries. So how is it with those? Are we still compliant with their regulations as well? And in parallel to that, I also received the feedback, this is not really complying to existing best practices like GAMP. So aren't we getting in compliant by establishing this? And my feedback here was, no, it's not that we are different. We are not being in compliant to regulations, even to the EU regulations and so on. It's just a different interpretation of the regulation. It's just not following an old and existing best practice. It's a new practice, and hopefully it will get a new best practice soon. In regards to the GAMP, I can hand over to Khaled as a member of the steering committee GAMP North America. What's their thoughts? But from my experience, I don't see any real gaps to the GAMP guidance as well. But Khaled, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ISB GAMP immediately, literally after, we've been doing a lot of these presentation and webinars, they definitely understood what CSA is. It's basically what they've been talking about for years, right? And they endorsed it immediately with a white paper saying, ISB GAMP supports it. As a matter of fact, I'm on a team now that we're writing appendix that will go into the data integrity by design GPG. So again, the entire industry is following CSA because it's a good practice, and it's practice that meant, to be part of when we talk risk-based approach, no one really defined what that is. So every organization decided to do it their own way, right? So really all what we're trying to do with the recommendation that we provided the FDA and the CSA guidance is about common sense, critical thinking. We're not cutting corners. It's just a matter of focusing on quality versus compliance. And again, this is Khaled speaking to that, but from an ISPE GAMP, it supports it 100%. They're talking about it day in, day out, and they're going to be a lot more coming up on CSA.
Yeah, thanks, Khaled. Perfect. And and another concern that I received is, hey, this guidance is not out. So shouldn't we wait until the FDA guidance is out before we establish it? Or in parallel, hey, shouldn't we better wait and keep this, be conservative and follow the common best practices to assure that we are in compliance to the regulations? And again, I think it was already mentioned also by Cisco. no, don't wait until the guidance is out, move on and implement it, because it's just another interpretation of the regulation. It's not something that is somehow incompliant or harming the regulations. So yeah. So another topic or another concern that I received was, hey, doesn't the FDA expect to test the whole software? And Khaled has also talked on that already when he mentioned to John in the past what he did for his software. No, it's not the expectation, and they have already the risk-based approach in their guidance. So we can do it risk-based, and also to that, the other topic is that is a sentence that everyone who is doing validation has in his mind when thinking about the FDA expectations is, hey, what is not documented is not done. In general, we also document everything in CSA. The only difference is we only document the important thing. And these things that are necessary to prove that we have the right level of assurance that the software works as expected and needed, without harming the patient. It's not necessary to document anything else that's giving non-value added information. And therefore, if you do a risk-based approach, you should also leverage your documentation based on the risk. Otherwise, this risk-based approach makes absolutely no sense. And the last point that I have also received is regarding signatures. They say, hey, shouldn't every stakeholder, including the quality assurance guys, sign every related document or relevant document? Because in this for CSA, the idea is to reduce also the signature parts of the documents drastically. And I can only tell, hey, there is no requirement, regulatory requirement that tells you everyone has to sign everything. There is the expectation, there is a creator of a document, and there should be someone that is an independent reviewer looking at the document and approving it, that it is correct. And for sure, different people, stakeholders should review the document, but there is no need that they all have to sign it. And because this is also one of the burdens during CSV projects, that you have a lot of signatures on each document, and you have to pass it around, and that takes a lot of time without, again, non-value adding activity. It's just getting the signatures on there, and no one requests those. I mean, I can pass to Cisco about their expectation from the FDA regarding signatures, but I'm comment on that, please.
Yeah, I think that's I think you hit on a lot of really great points, barriers, and activities, right? Just even fundamentally, the idea that this is internationally not acknowledged or recognized. We've already seen companies who've implemented some of this process and change go through international audits and been successful. In fact, have gotten good reviews for the critical thinking and risk-based approach that went in there. The international standards are much better explicitly written to account and allow for that consideration of risk through their activities. So what is being done here is not something that would throw you out of compliance there. But the idea of signatures, and this also ties with something that we are trying to just provide clarity on for a while, which is a pain point that we've heard is the Part 11 compliance, electronic signature. The signature activity is not necessarily an activity that's always necessary, right? There are certain processes or activities that explicitly call out, I need a signature from quality assurance in the regulations. Those are the predicate rules that exist where that's a necessary activity. That's where electronic signatures, if you're using them, FDA would have to see more validation effort done on the signature piece. But signatures, that's really a process that's established by the organization. It's dependent on the work activity. What do you need, and what is the actual verification that's required of acknowledging that the work was done and that there's ownership of the activity and the value-added efforts that were done. And that's not necessarily always a signature. One of the advantages of these systems and reasons to implement them is that they come with built-in audit trails. You've already got that log and record of who's done what and where. So those signatures are oftentimes situations and activities that the company and their processes have laid on themselves. That's the point that we've been trying to correct here. FDA has never said, you don't really need that. So, we're trying to say, in this end, in this standpoint, be judicious, use some thought, and really think through, do you really need that extra effort, that extra burden, that extra lag, all those extra checkpoints for that activity? Or is, the sign off or the acknowledgement of the person who did the work enough for your process, and move on from there? Don't add this extra waste in the process if it's not needed.
Yeah. Thanks, Cisco, for clarifying that as well from the FDA standpoint. So those are the concerns, and but as basis on the concerns and on the things that we already have established at Fresenius, and where we're going to go to, we have recognized 3 pillars of transformation to get from CSV to CSA, improving our CSV processes to moving towards CSA. And those 3 pillars are our CSA documentation itself. Here we want to get them more streamlined, more. We want to remove redundant information and non-value adding information, and we want to simplify and generalize those by moving from verbal documents towards templates, toward forms where someone can add the information into specific sections instead of thinking how to create this document at the end of the day. That makes it much easier also for non-experienced validation engineers or project managers to create those kind of documents, because it's again non-value adding activity if you always invent these documents again and again. So simplifying the documentation by using forms, merging even templates or documents so that we have less documentation or less documents at the end of the day, and as I mentioned, remove redundant information is one goal that we had when transforming from CSV to CSA. The other one, and this will be most likely the one that reduces the efforts during the project as most, is the pillar of test execution and result or testing documentation. And here the main goal is to establish the possibility to use unscripted and limited scripted testing during the testing efforts. So we are already risk-based at Fresenius, but the different risk levels only tell us the content of the tests, but every single test is documented the same way. We create very detailed test scripts with step-by-step guidance how to test something, even if it's a low risk or a medium risk. The goal is to use the possibility to accept unscripted or limited scripted testing. So we don't have a test script, but we test the function, and afterwards someone ticks off, hey, I've tested it, there are no failures in there. That is sufficient assurance for us if the risk is low level. So that is one thing, and as well, removing this kind of evidence capturing, specifically this kind of screenshot capturing nightmare that we have during testing, if it's not necessary. We do not have to take screenshots for single test steps or and so on. For high risk testing, it might be necessary to take a screenshot at a certain level during the process to show that it works. But for low or medium risk testing, screenshots, I mean, it comes hand in hand with this unscripted testing. These detailed evidences are not necessary. We nevertheless have documented what we have done because someone tells us, hey, I did this test of the function and it works without failure. That's our evidence. There's no need to add more evidence on that. Taking screenshots of working functions in the system, for example. Yeah. So that's the second pillar, and the third one, as I mentioned before, are the signatures. We have removed the amount of mandatory signatures to only the creator and one independent reviewer per document. And we also removed the mandatory QA signatures from the document. Nevertheless, we will establish in the projects equality gates where the QA team can anyhow look in the projects and see if everything is done correctly, documented correctly from a good documentation perspective, for example. But it's not necessary that they look at each and every single document and sign this off. Again, this is here I highlighted that these are the mandatory signatures. If in a project or a specific quality guy wants to be in the signature loop, that's fine for us. They can add themselves if necessary, but it's not. We don't want to force it from the CSA or CSV perspective. That's the important thing. That the other thing is a company internal or quality decision to be on the signature loop, but it's not that we from CSA expect these signatures. That's the important thing here. So these three pillars are the ones that we have established, and we have revised our CSV procedures towards CSA procedures. And thanks to Khaled and his team, they have supported us here and also checking it from a non-Fresenius eye to see, hey, maybe there are room for improvements. Did I misinterpret something? It could be also possible. And we have also harmonized it with the North American colleagues for CSV so that we, at the end of the day, will get a CSA approach that is globally aligned and can be used all over Fresenius Medical Care.
Absolutely. I can just say, great things about what you've done and your team. And thank you, Bill, for the opportunity. It's absolutely a beautiful piece, and it's global. That's what's really important. It's a global process. Bill, I know you wanted to say something. It looks like you want to say something. Go ahead.
No. I was actually just listening and agreeing with what Marc explained, that the journey that we're on. We struggled internally to, we were waiting for the guidance to be approved. And, I think that was a hurdle that we had to overcome. And I think we finally got to the point where we convinced ourselves and that, this guidance doesn't change the regulations or even the intent of where everything is going. So that's when I kept pushing and said, let's just do this. Let's get it done. And so, so we did. And, that's where Marc and others within the company working with you, Cal, and your team have really helped us put this together. So
great. Thank you. And I would like
just I was going to say, to quickly note on that, because I had not had a chance to see some of that detail from that report, but I think that's like an entirely brilliant approach. I could see the opportunity for a lot of potential streamlining with all of that put together.
Yep. Yeah. Cisco, quick question for you, and I think audience and everyone would want to hear it from the FDA. Let's suppose the guidance never gets released. What do we do now? Do we go back to old style CSV?
So I think this is kind of already set out in a situation where you kind of already let the genie out of the bottle. I think people are starting to figure out that this is a case where it's collectively we did this to ourselves. We can reset this. So even if that guidance comes out, which is highly unlikely, because I think it's been realized that it's very foundational and it's more important to a lot of the other FDA's initiatives for this to be out and be something that industry utilizes and takes advantage of. But should it not happen, again, genie's out of the bottle already. I think you guys talked about it and mentioned it beforehand, even before GAMP went through its recent comments and acceptance CSA. Their principles of all this were already there. The ISO 1345 standard increments these principles throughout the process, right? So it's just really a matter of applying them and being able to tell the story around that application for your particular use and situation. I don't think this is going to go back in another direction. And internally, we're going to be training differently also with regards to this as we go. So
thank you very much, Cisco. Appreciate it. Jason, like to give you a last word. You always love closing.
No, I just echo everything you've heard. I mean, there's no reason everyone shouldn't be moving towards this approach. I mean, apply critical thinking. Don't let old conservative ways of thinking stand in the way of doing what makes sense. At the end of the day, this is not about not doing more testing. In fact, it's the opposite. I just want to make sure that message gets across. This is about doing more testing, faster testing, but doing it in a way that's value added, that is going to significantly reduce the amount of documentation based on the risk type of approach you can take. So yeah, just echo everything you've heard, and it's great to see how far Fresenius has come. Marc's presentation, it's you guys really helped to start this, so I'm really glad to see that the organization's embracing it. So kudos to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Again, it's an honor just to have, of course, Marc, but looking at Bill, Cisco, and Jason, these are the guys that started all this revolution, right? So really, guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is amazing. Thank you, Marc. Great couple of slides. Billy, you got everything you wanted to get out there, and I guarantee you, a bunch of the industry are just gonna go ahead and adapt CSA because it makes sense.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today. And Cisco, thank you very much for participating from the FDA.
no problem. Thank you guys for the opportunity here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.